So hello and welcome to the BSME's EAL Network's first webinar. Today's webinar will feature two speakers, Mr. Michael Hawkins, who is the lead coach for Be the Change Education Limited, and he is presenting on how to tweak your teaching to create a language-rich classroom environment that enables EAL and other pupils to thrive. And then we're just waiting for our representative from Text Help Limited to turn up, Mr. Jamie Ball, who's the Regional Education Manager. Mr. Hawkins has agreed to go first, so thank him very much. And I'll just do a brief introduction. The format we're going to follow is around a 20-minute presentation for each speaker, followed by 5 minutes for any questions, and you're very welcome to put questions in the chat function as we proceed. And we'll try our best to get the questions answered at the end. Jamie has just joined us. Hello, Jamie. Oh, sorry, I just have to meet everybody individually. So we will begin. Jamie, we had a slight change to the running order. Michael's going to start now, okay? And then you can go second.
Yeah, no problem.
Perfect. So Mr. Hawkins is the lead coach of Be the Change Education Limited. He's worked in education for 30 years in schools, local authorities, and in national roles. And he's worked with about 200 schools and colleges in the United Kingdom and abroad. His main areas of coaching improving learning for pupils with English as an educational language, special educational needs, and those whose disadvantaged pupils, helping them through quality first teaching. He also works with safeguarding and child protection. And this is his presentation on how to tweak your teaching to create a language-rich classroom environment that enables EAL and other pupils to thrive. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd say it's very nice to see you all, but I can't, as you know, we're living in the virtual world. Cameras off. Good morning from snowy London. It's been snowing here. It's quite nice. So I'm going to talk about supporting pupils whose first language isn't English. But what are we really talking about? When I work with schools up and down the country, certainly in the UK, but also abroad, sometimes we're shining the spotlight on, as I say, developing English as an additional language. But, you know, sometimes I work across whole schools and we're actually talking about developing subject-specific literacy across the curriculum, which will support pupils whose first language isn't English, because actually they don't just need, obviously, you know, separate intervention classes. They need an experience across all of their subjects, which is literacy rich. Teachers often say to me, well, how can I teach literacy in my subject area? So that's what I'm going to talk about for the next 20 minutes. If you're aware of the work of Professor Lynn Cameron, about 20 years ago, she did an analysis of the linguistic needs of pupils at Key Stage 4 and 5, and at the end of Key Stage 2, those whose first language wasn't English, but were maybe called advanced learners of English because they were either born in the UK or they'd been here quite a long time. And she also analysed the language and literacy needs, academic literacy needs of pupils who were native speakers. And what she identified was, apart from the very, very top band of native speakers, a quite small group, all native speakers and more advanced learners of EAL needed explicit language teaching at the end of Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 4 and 5 if they were going to have the academic literacy across the subjects that they were taking exams in order for them to do well. And sometimes when we shine the torch on children whose special educational needs, disabilities, we talk about speech, language and communication needs. The Communication Trust, which you can find online, the Communication Trust has lots of free downloadable packs about what the expected speech, language and communication levels are for all pupils when they enter nursery all the way up to when they leave secondary school. And what I'm really trying to say is that while we're talking about EAL pupils today, we're actually talking about cross-curricular literacy. We're talking about academic literacy. We're talking about speech, language and communication. What we need is language-rich environments across our schools, not just for English, but for the other languages that are spoken in our schools. That could be Arabic, could be any language, because being bilingual, being trilingual as an adult is a really big advantage. And how explicit is that across our schools? And how do we explicitly teach language and literacy through our subjects. And that's what I want to talk about. And sometimes that vexes people and it seems quite complicated, but in fact, it's not really. Next slide, please, Jamie. Sorry, Matthew. So what constitutes good practice in EAL? When you look at this house, actually, this constitutes good practice probably for teaching all pupils in some way, shape or form. The foundation for solid EAL practice is underpinned by multiple opportunities for speaking and listening, focused activities in groups and pairs, opportunities to construct things jointly, whether it's pieces of writing before you do it independently, or preparing presentations before you deliver it, including independently. And of course, things like feedback, formative assessment, and other types of assessment provide opportunities for discussion and thinking to take place, and that could be self, peer, or teacher, as you know. But all of those are just opportunities for pupils to think about their learning, to think about their needs, can produce, metacognition. And then what are the things that we can do as teachers? Well, of course, we think about teaching vocabulary, but it's much more than that, because the language that we use, such as the language of comparing, the language of summarizing, those language structures, there are functions within those that type of expression, and there are actually particular phrases and expressions that we use in order to summarize effectively or to compare effectively. And actually thinking about those, moving on beyond just keywords, is quite important. And then as teachers, modelling. How often do we model in our classrooms? How often do we model more than once if we want pupils to be able to understand and to do something? How often do we give pupils the opportunity to rehearse orally something that they may then turn into a more formal writing? How often do we make explicit links between first and second languages? And we don't need to speak other people's languages, but we can ask a question, what would this be in Arabic? And they might not know it. Give them tasks to go away and do, or to think about, so that they can understand that, just by asking simple questions like that, we're making explicit links that both languages are equally important. And then scaffolding can be a whole range of things. Of course, how often do we regularly use visuals or activities that allow them to get inside a character, or to think about in a more profound way what it is that we want them to understand? How often do we provide them scaffolds such as talk or writing frames, or activities which allow them to deconstruct some of the text that they're reading and put it into, for example, a graphic organizer? Maybe it could be a table, something in science. Why do we put things in the table? Because then we use that information to construct our understanding, whether if we have to write about it afterwards, we've got some ideas to write about, rather than just the assumption that somehow I've gathered these ideas in my head. Specific activities which support the steps of learning to achieve the goal that we want them to do. Next slide, please. Let me sort of exemplify what I mean by this very simple task. So I'm going to ask you to do a task. You don't need to speak out loud. It's not going to take more than a couple of minutes. Look at this scene. This isn't the same scene that I'm looking at today because it's covered in snow outside. Imagine that you're an English literature teacher and you've taken your class to this hillside to look on this scene. And you ask your pupils to work in pairs to talk about, from an English perspective, what they can see here. What language would you expect them to be using if they were doing that well? Just take about 20 seconds to sort of think of examples of the kinds of language that you would expect them to use. I wonder if you can. If they're doing it well, what can you hear them saying? What words are they using? Okay, stop. Imagine that you're a geography teacher now, and you've taken your class and you're standing on that hillside, and you tell them to work in pairs for a moment and to discuss the geographical features that they can see before them. Just take a moment to think, what language would they be using if they were able to do that well? Just think of those words for yourself. You may know them, you may not. And finally, imagine that you're a history professor and you're standing there with your colleague, another eminent history professor, and you believe that underneath that hillside there is an Iron Age fort, and you're discussing that possibility. What language would you be using to have that discussion with your colleague? Just take a few seconds to think about what kinds of words you might be using. Next slide, please, Matthew. Next click or two. And the point is, if it was literature, maybe the pupils were describing, evaluating, or expressing feelings. You can see the words on the screen. Maybe you came up with some of these words yourself. If it was the geography teacher, maybe that teacher would have heard them naming, locating, describing, talking about cause and effect. Those are the language sort of functions. And then what are some of the words and structures that you would expect them to be able to use? You can see some examples there on the screen. And if it was the history professor, maybe they would have been naming and locating and describing first, but then moving on to deducing and hypothesizing. Those are the language functions and the structures that they would use for that, maybe some of the vocabulary, and then moving on to some of the expressions that lead to deducing and hypothesizing. The point is that the language is determined by the task that you want them to do. So when you're considering how might I use this across subjects, the point is, I'm not asking you to plan your subjects differently. Think whatever you want to teach pupils, whatever the outcomes that you want them to be able to demonstrate are, that will determine the language that needs to be used, but also needs to be explored. So next slide, Matthew. So very simply, when supporting planning your lessons for EAL pupils, and I appreciate some of you will have been working online for much of the last, well, almost the last year, and that presents some challenges. But if you use these 4 key planning questions when you're thinking about the lessons that you've planned, these will absolutely help you to think about what tweaks can I make to my teaching and the activities that I want them to do that will support learners with EAL. These aren't my planning questions, by the way, but I use these all over the country when I go and work with schools. And I say to teachers, if you have these with you, when you've planned your lessons, if you then consider these questions and make some tweaks accordingly, you will be thinking about the language and linguistic needs of the demands of the lesson. These are from Professor Pauline Gibbons in Australia, an eminent academic in the world of language acquisition. The first question, really simply, knowing your pupils, I want to teach them this, and I want them to be able to do this. What strengths and what challenges do the students have? You'll know what they are able to do and what things they may struggle with. And the second question is, okay, I want to teach this. What language will the students need to use to successfully complete the activities? If they're doing it well, what would you hear them saying? Often subject teachers say to me, well, I don't really feel confident as a sort of to teach literacy in my subject. But the interesting thing is, if you ask question number 2, that is the literacy of your subject. Because if you know your content, then you'll know what you'd expect to see and hear, and what you'd expect to see in writing if the students are able to do it well. And so, in fact, you are able to teach literacy because you know what the language requirements are. And the third question then is, okay, in order for them to be able to do this, what activities will I need to include to give them an opportunity to present or to use the focused language? And these could be deconstruction activities, deconstructing some text, transferring information from text, as I said, into things like graphic organizers. These are steps on the way to then having things to write or talk about. But they could be very simple activities. They don't have to take a long time. But in a sense, if you don't provide those opportunities and go straight into children working on the main activities you want them to do, if you find them struggling with that and being stuck, they may need some other steps along the way in order to build up to that. And then the final question is, what scaffolds do I also need to provide to help them to complete it? Now, we don't have time in 20 minutes to actually sort of exemplify the range of types of scaffolds, but again, they can be simple, they can be used again and again, but they need to be built in explicitly until you can see that students are able to do the work that you want without the need for those. They can be talk and writing frames. They can just be actually an opportunity to focus on an activity. They can be glossary sheets where pupils are building up a glossary of words over time. And it's interesting, I was teaching online, of course, last week, and teachers were asking me about that. And the key thing is the students need to be the ones doing the work. Don't provide them with loads of glossaries of terms that you've prepared yourself. Make it organic, make it through the lesson. So words that you can pre-teach some of the words and they can put them into glossaries, but they can also, if it's needed, translate them into their own language. They can put an example in a sentence so you can see that they can exemplify it. But they should be the ones doing that work. If you use these 4 key planning questions, particularly questions 2, 3, and 4, while preparing your lessons, or giving these key planning questions to your colleagues and thinking about with them, what that would look like in practice and giving them some suggestions. This is a fantastic framework to make some very simple tweaks. It seems to focus on language, but what it also allows us to do, if we're thinking about the EAL house that I shared earlier, is it encourages greater participation and engagement. And actually, those are key elements that all EAL pupils need in order to consider, explore, and acquire the language they need to be able to complete the task they complete. And I've just been given the 5-minute notice by Matthew. Thank you very much for that. But I've actually completed my talk for today. I talked faster than I expected. So has anybody got any questions at all?
If anyone has any questions, you're very welcome to unmute and ask, or to write it into the chat.
Just to say, my website's being developed at the moment, so the mycoach.academy is not, it's not going to be live for another couple of weeks, but if you're interested. If you would like to know what that looks like in practice, some of the exemplification, I'll be more than happy to share some examples with you. You can get in touch with me by email, and I'm more than happy to give you ideas of the kinds of activities that address those questions that I've done with schools over the last couple of years. So they're all practical and they're all kind of new.
Thank you very much, Michael. Let's just note that this recording will be put on the BSME's website and on the YouTube channel, I believe. So if you'd like to get Michael's email address at a later date, you're very welcome to either email me as network lead or to make a note of it now, or to check it in the recording. Next, we're moving on to, We're moving on to Jamie Ball's presentation on text help. Thank you very much, Michael, for your presentation so far. So Jamie Ball is the Regional Education Manager of Text Help Limited. He's an accomplished international speaker. I've actually seen him myself in Jordan once. And his big area of expertise is around creating inclusive learning for all, with a focus on support for the bi and multilingual students. His experience is obviously teaching students English as an additional language, where he provides practical and experienced perspective. And this presentation is on language acquisition technology that works, to explore how using a simple set of technological tools can underpin good practice for language acquisition. And hopefully we'll all understand how best to develop vocabulary, support translanguaging, and improve reading and writing fluency through the effective use of software that provides personalized learning help for students and delivers independence for learning. Now, Jamie's going to try presenting from his computer.
Yeah, thank you. So let's see, just give me 2 seconds here.
And similarly as before, if you have any questions, there will be 5 minutes after the presentation to ask any questions. You're welcome to write them in the chat during the talk, but they will be answered after the presentation. Over to you, Jamie.
Yeah, no problem. Just make sure, Matthew, can I just confirm that you can all see my screen there with the embarrassing emoji?
Yes.
Yeah, no problem. Well, first of all, I want to apologize for that emoji. Our marketing team always makes sure, or try to make sure that our emojis match our actual look, and I think it's pretty accurate, to be honest with you. So, as Matthew said, I am Jamie, and I am the regional education manager at TextHelp for the GCC nations. Just put up a few of my contact details there. So, if you do have any questions after the presentation, do feel free to reach out to me at jball.texthelp.com, or my Twitter handle is there as well. So I've only got 20 minutes, so we're going to try and fly through as many slides that are as relevant as possible. I am cautious. I don't want to be deaf by PowerPoint or Google slide presentations, but give you a little bit of background about TextHelp and what we do. So we have just over 180 employees based here in the UK. We have offices throughout the world, and some stats of note, effectively 7 in 10 US districts currently use our products. The 68% of all qualifying UK higher education students currently use our Read and Write product, which is our flagship product. We typically onboard about 25,000 students every single day around the world, and since the whole COVID pandemic, that has actually increased significantly. At this time last year, to about June, we saw an increase of about 6 million students of our Read and Write product alone, and about 3 million of Equatio, our maths product, depending on where you're from. And talking about Read and Write, we have about 30 million users globally at the minute, and about 6 million of those, as I said, have been over the last year or so. Going on to the products that we actually provide, and that we are in a number of schools, obviously in the GCC there as well. We have Equatio, which is our math product, which I'm not going to talk about today, but any of you math buffs out there, do feel free to reach out to me about that. It will change the way you work, and it'll make it a lot easier for your students to interact with you on a digital platform. Read and Write, which is our main literacy product, which I will touch on, but not too much, I hope. Write-Q is a very, very new product. It's just very recently been endorsed by the Department of Education in England to be used as their automated assessment tool of choice for about 22,000 schools. I'll not touch too much on that, as I would need about an hour to 2 hours to talk through it. Fluency Tutor is a Google-only product, and it allows students to develop their reading processes in the comfort of their own home. It's something that is very apt in today's society with the whole remote learning or hybrid learning program. And then we have Snapfurter, and that just simply allows you to turn a paper-based topic into a digital format there as well. So what I am here to talk to you today about is language acquisition technology that works. Now, whenever I am talking about technology with schools and doing presentations, it is always important to see how that technology affects the pedagogy. And really three ways. How does it impact your pedagogy? How does it impact your students? And the fact is that we should not, as teachers, be limited to a certain platform. That is not a decision for us to make, where the school says you have to use Google Docs or you have to use Microsoft Word. Any technology that we select needs to be used or be able to be used on any platform. Student may be using Teams in school, but they may have an iPad at home. So it's important that we're providing that kind of same support network in school and at home as well. If we look at the technology that we provide here at TextHelp, we do that. Our Read and Write products, our Equatio products do work on all platforms. And as I said, Windows, Google, Apple devices, and Android there as well. Whenever we're looking at technology, it's important that we do have the ability to enable those students, to encourage them. And as Michael previously mentioned there, making sure that we have the scaffolding to support them there as well. But it's also important that we reach every EAL learner. But we also want to make sure that we are leveling the playing field to ensure that those students who do struggle maybe a little bit are able to learn at the same rate as their peers. It's really, really vitally important. Now, just to clarify some definitions, L1 is first language or mother tongue, and BML is bi or multilingual learner there as we go through the presentation. So we're just going to touch on a few different slides now that kind of cover these particular definitions. So if we look at this, I have listed 4 particular aspects or important aspects to focus on for EAL students. And that is prior knowledge, language in context, comprehensible output, and comprehensible input there as well. So we'll go through the presentation here, and we will cover those different aspects that are focused on. So if we think about technology and how this can help, we can translate this into 4 main areas, and that is the context, the independence, the translation, and the vocabulary. So just going to touch now on some of the technological aspects that I think work well and have worked well for me in the past whenever I've had some particular students in my classroom. And the first one is the likes of a spell checker. So it's important that whenever we are choosing a spell checker, that we have the likes of dyslexic dictionary built into it there, and we have the prediction features as well. And these kind of features inside Google Docs, Microsoft Teams, and other bits of software, it's important to note the student does use this with care. I often get asked the question, do you feel that prediction is cheating a little bit? Well, no, not really. It depends on what context, again, that you're using that particular tool. But for me, prediction allows the student to learn the chain of words, the sequence of words. They're always seeing the correct spelling. For instance, they're not going to say, follow the word United States by the word Angola or United Arab Emirates. You're going to get the correct chain of words, and it wasn't. So it allows that association of those words for the students, lets them see the correct spellings, the punctuation there as well. If we move on to another bit of technology that works really, really well whenever we're looking at EAL is word cloud. So one of my particular favorites is wordle.net. I do thoroughly recommend going and checking that out. And this can be used as a starter, a way to start particular topics. It can also be used for topic-based revision, and also opinion, but also personal writing analysis. So it can be used in an EAL setting. So what I'll do, I'll show you the words that an EAL student has used or particularly is overused. Allows them to be able to identify that and then go away and potentially look at using a different set of words or a word that is showing up there. And as you may know or you may not know, the more the word is used, the bigger it'll appear inside that word cloud. I do thoroughly recommend checking out wordle.net. It's something I use on a weekly basis when giving presentations and internal trainings as well, and also to our current customer base. Okay, if we look at vocabulary references, vocab references are really, really important whenever we're looking at EAL learners here. One tool that is really good for this is our vocab reference tool inside the read and write toolbar. So this allows you to select a number of different words. So this could be in, say, 5 or 6 different documents. It could be on Microsoft Teams, it could be Google Docs, it could be a web page, it could be on any LMS. That toolbar will open at the top of the screen, and their highlighter functions will work across those different tabs, if you like. So we could use yellow for nouns, we could use blue for adjectives, whatever it may be. You can highlight those words and hit the vocab button. As you'll see on the screen there in that GIF, it will pull all those words into a new tab, and that tab will open and it will give that student the word, the meaning, and the symbol. And then it also has a little space there for the notes. So that allows the student to select the words that they are struggling with. Instead of the teacher, you at the front of the classroom or online saying, okay, Matthew, you have to learn these 5 particular words that I have selected. It is based on the principles of universal design for learning, putting the power back into the student's hand there for those words that they can select. It also gives a very, very quick reference for the teachers that if I have, say, Matthew coming into my class tomorrow and I know that Matthew has struggled with these 5 particular words, for me as a teacher, it allows me to select those 5 words really, really quickly and make a worksheet for them. And what we often find is teachers will go into the notes column there and they will add in a new column and they will create different tasks for the students to do on their particular words that they have struggled with. Just really, really quick vocab reference for the student, but also for the teacher there as well. Now, on to text to speech. This is something that is used quite a lot whenever we're looking at EAL learners. And for me, it's kind of stress-free learning. Don't have the stress of being able to sit down and decode that language as I'm trying to read through it. I can simply select anywhere in the paragraph and hit play, and it will read it back to me. The beautiful thing about this is it has dual track highlighting, particularly in the read and write toolbar. And yellow and blue are the kind of standard default there. And there's been quite a bit of scientific research, particularly by the British Dyslexic Association, that yellow and blue are the two best colors for those with dyslexia, but also English language learners as well, to process and track information. And if you see the circles at the bottom of the screen, that kind of relates back to one of my first slides there in terms of the different contexts of technology itself. So what can text-to-speech actually do for an English as an additional learner or language learner, and how can it help them? So it helps students access grade level content. It also helps those students focus on comprehension, helps students to listen and understand content above reading level, helps students to proofread, and all, as I previously mentioned, relieves the burden of decoding there as well as the cognitive load, and improves confidence, endurance, and completion, and it improves pronunciation. But as we go on here, this is our particular text-to-speech function inside read and write, and this is the Google toolbar itself. So as you'll see there, one of the things I love about this is that you do have the option to change the voice to about 58 different accents. And again, that is very, very personal. It's based on the Universal Design for Learning. The student gets to pick what voice is applicable to them. And you'll see there, we also have translation built in straight away. So this is a really, really simple feature for a student, an EAL learner. If they're unsure of a word, they can change that to their mother tongue, for instance, Bahasa Malu, or whether that is Arabic or Spanish or French, whatever it is. We actually support 66 different languages for translation and localization into the mother tongue for those particular students. So next feature is dictionary. So this is something that is really, really powerful whenever we're looking at that bilingual learner. A picture gives them that kind of context for what they're looking at. But what I like to do with this is have my document open, and I will show a particular learner at the very start of a training session there that they can select a word they're unsure of. They can open up the dictionary. The dictionary will tell them or give them that definition, but more importantly, it can be read aloud. So again, we're taking away that cognitive load, that decoding aspect of the word, and we can have that read aloud. If I open up the picture dictionary tab there as well on the right-hand side, it means that a student is having access to that word being read aloud. They're seeing and hearing the definition, and they're seeing a visual picture for the context there as well. If I was to go along and select a different word, that definition and picture will also change as well. So something that's pretty useful for a student to identify and learn new words, but also use in conjunction with the translation feature as well there. So one thing I really like about our toolbar is you can have 2 or 3 different boxes open at the same time, and you're getting lots and lots of information in one place. I like to essentially call it 20 AT or assistive technology tools in one place, a buffet of learning options for that EAL learner, but also the different learners in your classrooms. And that is obviously at school and at home as well. Obviously, I previously mentioned the translation there. So in terms of the lesson objectives, potentially in the likes of L1, we're looking at lesson aims, the dual language keywords, reverse translation for accuracy, use with text-to-speech in the picture dictionary, as I previously just mentioned, and guessing the context for new words. Some of the powerful ways that you can use that translation feature for an EAL lesson, or giving the student the power of this assistive technology to themselves. And again, on whatever platform that they feel comfortable to use. If we're looking at audio now, this is something that I use on a daily basis, particularly in giving feedback or having discussions with my colleagues on a particular document that we're all working on at the same time. It allows the student to provide alternative notes. You can use it as a podcast, really, really good for, as I mentioned there, for feedback. You as a teacher giving feedback, it allows your student to hear the pitch, intonation in your voice, words of encouragement, constructive feedback, but it can also be used as talking books, particularly at Key Stage 2. You can actually use record for talk for writing. So that can be used as a student, particularly in the hybrid, the buzzword at the minute, a hybrid learning curriculum, or that remote learning curriculum at the minute, but also likes the talking tins as well there. If we move on to the next slide, in terms of putting it all together with read and write, we can see that we have the likes of the current resources, whether that's Microsoft Word, Google Docs. We can use the vocab references, the creating the audio, the text to speech, the prediction, the feedback, and also the reference there and the feedback as well. So this can be used in likes of pre-writing, and some of the features like play, dictionary, picture dictionary, highlights for that pre-writing phase, drafting in terms of prediction, talk and type. We also have PDF tools there as well. So any students that are being given PDFs and they're not maybe accessible, don't worry. There is PDF tools available inside the read and write option to make that fully accessible and applicable for that EAL learner. Then if we're looking at revising, again, the likes of play, dictionary, highlights, the audio maker as well. And if we move on to that editing phase for a particular EAL writer, and the likes of the play function, the text to speech, the voice notes, and again, the comments in the PDF. And then finally, publishing. It's completely shareable, whether that is through 365 or Google Drive, and you can, of course, print that as well. Moving on to the simplicity, I like to talk about the simplicity of the toolbar. It's all in one place, 20 AT tools in one place there, and it's one vendor. So it's essentially one purchase order whenever a school is looking to procure them. So whenever we're looking at that simplicity, we need to add all these things together as a solution for an EAL learner. And for me, that solution is read and write as one of our products there. It can provide that additional support to an EAL learner, again, in school or at home. What I like to talk about is creating a backpack for success, that backpack for success for student. Again, whether in school or at home. And as you see there, read and write is going into the backpack for this particular student, but we also have some of our other products there as well. So if we look and we refer back to our original checklist, against those particular metrics there, we covered some of the AT tools or EdTech tools, and cover the context, the independence for a particular EAL student, that translation for the student, and also the vocabulary for the student as well. Always looking to improve that vocabulary, but allowing the student to learn on their own terms and their own merits. Again, based on the principles. So that's scaffolding for learning and the UDL principles as well there. If you're interested in learning more, and I know a lot of the schools are running hybrid curriculums at the minute, but some are doing remote learning, and some are hoping to welcome back a full body of students in the coming weeks. And we do offer a guide to remote learning through using technology. It is a PDF, and there's some really, really great resources there. And if you are interested in receiving that, just simply email me at j.ball@texthelp.com with the word remote in the subject heading, and it'll just simply be a reply with that PDF and guidance to the remote learning for your students at the minute. And of course, there will be some aspects of EAL in there as well, but I'll mostly focus on that remote learning aspect and the transition from being in class to remote learning, making sure the students are getting all the support that we can offer them essentially. If you are interested in starting a pilot or learning more about the TextHelp products, feel free to send me an email again, j.ball@texthelp.com. It's just pilot in the subject line. And we simply just enable your domain and send over you all the information, allow you to get started. We have lots and lots of schools in the Middle East that are on pilots at the minute, particularly with the current pandemic, to make sure that that is the kind of resources that students can get the most out of. I believe I'm just under 20 minutes now. It's kind of a fly through of lots and lots of information. Of course, I will provide any slides that you would like to have access to. Just let me know. Again, I can provide that with any of the information you request as well, whether that's the guide to remote learning or the request to start a pilot. Is there any questions at all at this stage? feel free to put them in the notes, the conversation there, or you can unmute and fire ahead.
Thank you very much, Jamie. It doesn't look like there's going to be many questions. So in that case, thank you all ever so much for coming to the first inaugural BSME webinar for EAL. I hope some of you found it very informative. I know I certainly have. Thank you all very much. Well, thank you to our speakers as well, Michael and Jamie.
Yeah, cheers, Matthew. Thanks, Michael.